I am Leon E. Chief Frazier, and I am a law enforcement person for many moons, more than 40 years now. And there's a critical issue in this nation about police behavior and criminal justice behavior. So before we start this meeting, could we please go to the bishop to get God's permission to proceed with this meeting?
Yes, sir. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, as we humble ourselves before you at this time and at this hour, we do so first of all, Lord, in a spirit of thanksgiving. We're grateful that you have brought us this far by faith, that regardless of what may be going on in the world and in this nation around us, you have kept us, you have sustained us, you have held us in the hollow of your hand, and we're yet able to say all is well with our souls. We ask and pray as we partake of this meeting this afternoon, that above all things, that your presence would be made evident, that God, you would take charge of our thoughts, our tongues, our minds, our hearts. Father, we ask and pray that as we come together, that we would leave with solutions and with answers to real life problems. And then use us, Lord. Oh, we're so quick in our prayer to say, Lord, you go. But Father, we want you to equip us that we might go and do what you have assigned our hands and hearts to do. And so, God, we turn this meeting over to you right now, asking that you would take the lead in every aspect. It is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop.
Yes, sir.
Now, the format today is simple. We're going to make sure that everybody on this call get a chance to speak. And we want you to do two things. We want you to tell who you are and justify why you have the audacity to come on to Zoom to talk to the world about criminal justice reform. And then I want you to give your best interpretation, round it off with what you think could be a workable process or a workable improvement in police behavior and the criminal justice system in order to make this society a better society. So with that, I believe that we have selected from the two of our mind, the bishop and mine, some of the most worthy people that we know. Not all of the worthy people that we know, but certainly some of the most worthy people that we know. And we have confidence in your interpretations and your theories, your philosophies, and your opinions about what needs to be done to help to make a better criminal justice system in this society. So with 5 minutes each, we move now from me to Bishop McCory. Go ahead.
And I contend there is a role that all of us have to play as it relates to what criminal justice reform, inclusive of police reform, looks like. We have to come to some real understanding as to who plays a role in reform. We at the Congress absolutely believe that it's going to take the clergy community. Our law enforcement partners cannot be kept away from the table. Our other professionals, such as our attorneys, including prosecutors and certainly judges and probation and parole officials, need to be brought to the table to foster an understanding. We further believe that the glue that ought to bring all of us together is the faith community. The church plays an important role, and yet allow me to be very honest. As I say to you, the missing ingredient has been the Black church. I realize and recognize we live in a world where Black lives matter, and there are those who agree and disagree, but I contend, had the Black church continued in the energy and effort that was taught to us by Dr. King and C.T. Vivian and a host of others, if we had continued the fight, there wouldn't have been space or need for a Black Lives Matter as an organization. I'm not talking about as a movement. But if we had continued to do those things that we were assigned to do, I strongly believe that many of our issues and problems could have and would have been solved and settled by now. And so I applaud the energy and efforts of our young people who are continuing to lift up what it looks like for Black lives to matter. I applaud their energies and effort, wish them well, want them well, and will continue to fight alongside them as long as I have energy and breath to do so. Thank you.
Now, Bishop, what qualifies you to be speaking?
I think the thing that qualifies me, first of all, is for 40 years, from my days of SCLC involvement to my days of having organized a national tour that lasted for 3 years with mothers and family members of those who had lost their lives, especially at the hands of police. A 3-year tour prepared us, listening to the hearts of these parents, listening to people across the nation, working alongside young people, many of whom felt like they had been left off of the table, a table that they absolutely deserved to be at, prepared me to make sure that we were continually addressing the issue and addressing the problem. And I strongly believe that all of the years of this expertise and the fact that God has called us to this mission, there are those who are called to do a lot of things, Chief. And I believe that we have to, when we say God has called us, we have to then stop and let God tell us where we're supposed to be. We got a lot of folk pastoring that would be better teaching, and a lot of folk teaching that ought to be in the community. And so God has prepared us for a time such as this.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you so very much. Now, I'll go second because I wanted you to be first, because you came up with this brainchild that the clergy need to play a bigger role. And talking to me as a retired police chief, I realized right away that you was absolutely right, because law enforcement have oftentimes tried to use the church. When we would create a problem, they would go get the minister to try to cool the community down, instead of working collectively to identify the problem, isolate those symptoms, and then go on to work out long-term solutions. So let me put my little spiel in about law enforcement. Law enforcement police officers are people too. They are no better than anybody else, but they are just as good. So now police officers are but a recruitment process away from society. They come from among you people, and they come on, they file for the application, they get vetted, they get trained, and they get assigned, and then they also get disciplined on occasion for the wrong things that they do, as well as complimented for the good things that they do also. Now, that recruitment and vetting process can only drain so much of their humanism out of them. Now, you're not going to drain all the prejudice, all the racism, all of the evil, all of this disrespect, and all of the other negatives out of a human being just because you give that person a badge. But you can do your best to be the best that you can. Now, let me tell you something. There are 20,000 police departments in America. There are approximately 686,665 full-time law enforcement officers in America. Now, the problem that you see popping up on television can't be caused by all of those police officers, because if so, it would not be enough time to air all of the complaints in a day. So that means the majority of the police officers in this nation are out here totally committed to putting themselves on the line in order to serve and protect the people. Now, one of the things that bugged me a bit is we don't give good police officers much credit. We treat them like good children. When good children go to school, And when they get A's and plus, we just take that for granted. We'll say, talk for a minute and say, well, that's nice, honey. But when bad children go to school, quote unquote, on the bad children, and they file up, we'll spend all kinds of time and new programming and money paying them some attention. So my thing is, if we're going to damn the police officers for doing and then damn them if they don't do, well, then we ought to be complimenting and applauding these 686,000 police officers for the good that they do to keep our society protected from not only everybody else, but you see, the police is playing a great role in protecting us from ourselves. So it's society who have to look in the mirror and see ourselves for whom we are. And the combination of people on this call or in this meeting ought to be able to show clearly why we ought to do total criminal justice reform instead of just picking on the police. Now, you can go defund the police all you want to, and you can go talking about reforming the police officers all you want to. But let me show you what the criminal justice system is. Ms. TD, could you get that chart for me? The criminal justice system is from the president down through Congress, down through the Supreme Court, down through the Attorney General's office, down through all of federal law enforcement, on down through state legislatures, right on down through state Supreme Courts and appeal courts and state attorney generals, right on down through state law enforcement people, right on down to the lowest among them, the cities and councils and municipal courts and local district attorneys. And then it gets down to the people that you always pointed out, and I'm talking to the people now, the police. So you see, instead of wasting, okay, Ms. TD, instead of wasting all of your energy blaming and damning the police, please come to grips with the fact of who's created problems from you that's trickling down whammies on you by the day. So let me let that do for the minute and go to another spiritual person, Reverend King. What's your comments and how do you justify being here?
Thank you, sir, for your comments, and the bishop as well. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. But somewhere in our community, we have lost the fact that police are good for our community because they don't want their jobs that we don't go into because of what we have experienced in the streets or in our communities or in our homes or whatever. And my take is to get the job that one pays good money, good retirement benefits, and if you want to change, get involved with it as in other professions. Just like if you don't like preachers, swear. If you don't like preachers, go in the ministry. If you can't deal with it, don't go in it. Like in other profession. And we got to train our community, number one. Yes, there are good police, and we have witnessed police. I witnessed Piper, South Carolina. I remember when we first lost our first black officer there, and everybody was saying in the community, "Oh, he didn't like this, he's like that." I said, "Well, you don't know what he like, cause you don't know the job." But my point being, we so apt to criticize rather than understand whether police, preachers, judges, and our people have not learned yet. We have not gone down the entire ballot. We go to the ballot box, talking about the president, talking about the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of our state. We don't go down the ticket to our dog catcher. If you don't like the dog catcher, then find him a new job. And this election, our people got to learn how to give out pink slips like they give to us. Yeah, the famous line that the companies give us, "Oh, you've been good, faithful Negro with us for all these years, but you know we got this complaint against you now. We sorry to tell you this, but we don't need your service no more when I come." But then we got to start thinking, and some of us do think that way. We do, but we got to do it at the polls. We got to do it in every profession. It's just like when you get rid of a preacher in the church, and I hear the Negroes say about, "Oh well, we don't have any politics in the church." If you want to see the most political fight, go to a church meeting when they want to get rid of the pastor or call one. We know how to do that in our churches, but we can't do it in our community, in our society, when we see corruptness all around us with the judges, the police, the judges, the mayor, whatever. Find them a new job, and our agreement to this year, this election, go to the polls thinking, I got the pink slip in my hand. It's time for you to find a new job. You're not doing for the community and for this country to make our democracy worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sheriff Brunson, you are one of the most innovative sheriffs I have ever seen, because I'm going to tell on you. Not only do you do traffic stops to check people's driver's license, but you do chicken giveaway stops to give away chicken to people. Now, in all of my 40 years of law enforcement, I have never seen a law enforcement, the top guy, go to that extreme to get into the heart and soul and mind of his people. What say ye?
First of all, I want to say good evening to everybody. Good afternoon, I'd say that. I was a little bit late trying to get on here, but I think I caught most of it. And how you doing, Chief? You doing okay?
Yes, sir, just fine.
Okay, all right. So, you know, to me and law enforcement, it's all about the people. You know, you've been here with me for a long time. I value you as a friend, value you as a law enforcement officer, and value, you know, you just everything, because you're a great person. And that's what it takes to be in law enforcement right now. It takes great people to be in law enforcement. You know, we have a job to do, but definitely you got to think about the people. And I don't know if they thought you were kidding about giving out chicken and giving out things, but you have to be more than a sheriff in a community like this. And that's all over the world. You try to provide the needs of the people. And by providing the needs of the people, they understand you and don't see you as an enemy. They see you as a caring person who wants to do something in the community to help them. And that's the way I approach this job. You know, we talk about giving out chicken. Somebody called and say they had a truckload of chicken. I said, okay, hold on to that chicken, because I know some people that can use that chicken. And we went and picked up chicken and gave it out to everybody that we could. You know, people called and say, hey, our water's not on. Hey, we went and bought water and passed it out to all the people that needed water. And to me, you know, they see the sheriff as a person that's caring. They see my officers as people that's caring. You and your wife have been with me when we passed out toys to the kids, you know, during Christmas time, to the kids that don't have anything. And they can say, hey, that sheriff and his officers really care. And that's one of the ways that we're winning here, that being part of the community, trying to help. And we don't want the citizens and the people in this county only to see us when we come and arrest somebody. They know that when they mess up, hey, we're going to do our job. But we're also caring officers who cares about the community and going to do anything we can to keep, and everything we can to keep the community safe and keep the people happy here. You know, it's just not all about being a sheriff and being a police officer here, that they only see us when we come in to arrest somebody. That's the way I approach this job. That's the way I'm going to continue to approach this job. And you got to be part of the community, and they got to see you care about what's going on in the community.
Okay, Sheriff, tell me, what would be your response if one of your men lost it to the point that he knee choked someone to death, as was done in the George Floyd situation? This whole thing is related to discipline, sir.
Well, if somebody did that, first of all, I know I wouldn't put up with that. And for one thing, I hope it would never get to that, because I'm real selective when I select an employee here at my sheriff department. They got to be part of the community. They got to feel the way I do about the people here. I care about the people. And if I have the first sense that they don't care about the people, they've already lost their job. That's the first thing I tell them. You got to care about the people. You know, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, this job is for people who care. We got to realize that when we go on a call, that it's not personal. We're there because that somebody needs us. And we can't take our personal business to that call. We can't be mad at anybody. We can't show any type of meanness or anything, no matter what they do, because we were called there because somebody needed us. And that person that called might have had a bad day. We can't afford to have a bad day. This is not personal. But when you go to putting your hands on people for no reason, putting your knee on their neck, you know, you're going to suffer from me, and you're going to suffer from the judges and whatever they deem necessary when you do that, because that's a criminal act. We're not patted on the back for doing criminal acts. You can lose your job with me. You won't be out there or anything when I find out that you have those type of behaviors. We can't put up with that at all. But first, it starts with the hiring process. We got to know who we hiring and what they're capable of. We got to see these red flags before they happen. And of course, I'm sure red flags happen in all these cases with the way that that officers act from the beginning. And we got to take responsibility from that. And we just can't hire people because somebody needs a job. We just can't hire people because somebody wants a job or because they need a job. We got to make sure we put the right people in place in these jobs. And if they show red flags, then they can't work for us. And if they do these things, we got to deal with them, just like we got to hold everybody accountable for their actions.
Let's reduce it just a little bit, Sheriff. In Colorado the other day, about 5 police officers mistaken a family in a car, and they pull a felony stop on that car and pull women and children out of it, handcuff them with their hands behind their backs, had them lay down on the asphalt in the daytime, which had to be tremendously hot. And what do you say about an incident such as that? And how do a police chief or sheriff miss the boat by not anticipating the possibility that their officers could do something like that, as you just alluded to?
Well, first of all, you got to have common sense, and you got to be compassionate to the people and the families. First of all, I wouldn't have laid any kids or a family down on the hot cement. You wouldn't have done that to nobody, whether they were a criminal or not. That's just something you didn't do. You know, we're trained to do what we need to do to get people, you know, in the handcuffs if we need to. But once they're not a threat, you don't treat them as they're a threat. You know, common sense tell you wouldn't do that to a family, especially with kids. And if it was a threat, then I would handcuff them. If I thought they were a threat, yeah, they would be handcuffs. But after that, you know, the rest of it is a criminal act to me. And especially in Floyd's case, he wasn't a threat. They put handcuffs on him. Once they got the handcuffs on him, he was not a threat. He should have been placed on the ground, knee in his neck. And just like this family you were talking about, I hadn't heard about that incident. But if they had to put handcuffs on him, why lay him down on the ground like that? You could have sat him down if you needed to. You could have put him in the police car. And if my officers act like that, then I would have to deal with them.
Thank you, sir, so very much. Mixing it up, Reverend Kenneth G. Jones, you wear both hats, former law enforcement officer as well as a minister today. What say ye?
Well, first of all, I'm humbled to be a part of this discussion. I think it's critical that we as clergy have to remember that we're in the hope business. Our business is to remind people that there is hope, that no matter how difficult the situation is right now, God has provided the means by which we can be delivered. And it's up to us to remind people of that fact. From my previous life, before I went into ministry full time, I was a law enforcement officer with the National Park Service. And it was a unique philosophy in the fact that many law enforcement folks looked at us like we weren't real police, when in reality, we went through the same post-training that basically every police officer in America goes through. The unique challenge of being a land management law enforcement officer is that backup is not necessarily readily available. You might be in a situation where your backup might be 75 to 100 miles away. So you would have to exercise good common sense in order to get compliance and, most importantly, make it home to your family at the end of the day. I said all that to say this: we had very restrictive policies on how we were to enforce the law. First of all, we were providing public safety for people who were on vacation. And when we used to always say when folks went on vacation, many times they left their brains at home. And they would do things that our job was to get them in compliance for their safety and the safety of others. As a result, we had policies that we had to strictly adhere to. Our use of force policy was if you drew your weapon from its holster, whether you pointed it at anybody or not, that was the use of deadly force. And we had to do a case incident on why we used deadly force. We had a policy that we did not shoot fleeing felons or shot at automobiles in pursuit, because the philosophy was, what about the innocent bystanders? Or if you shoot that individual and kill the driver, then what do you do with the 4,000-pound missile going down the road? So these were policies that we worked with, and we still were able to get compliance from the people that we were interacting with. It's anathema to me to understand why these same common sense policies aren't being considered in many police jurisdictions around the country. Now, I'm gonna say this and I'll move on to another situation. Park rangers had a different policy than the U.S. Park Police. U.S. Park Police, their policies weren't as restrictive as ours. The main reason was their primary areas of enforcement was in Washington, D.C., and at the time that I was in the service in New York City at Gateway National Park. So having said all that, when I look at the issues we're wrestling with today, I don't see an issue with police per se. I think there's an issue with the entire system. First of all, we don't hold officers accountable. We don't hold each other accountable. Second of all, the prosecuting attorney, whose job it is to seek justice and truth, in many cases, it seems that they are in collusion with the law enforcement officers who are charged to protect and serve. And instead of them protecting the public, they interpret that they have to protect these law officers. And until we give some realistic attention to those situations, reform, what we're doing, what we're talking about, though we have the attention of the world, is not necessarily going to solve the problem. We have to look at the whole system, from the judges, the magistrates, the prosecutors, and the law officers, and finally, the people in the communities. Communities have to be the first line of what's going on. I can't sit in my house and hear gunshots and say, well, it's not my house, I ain't gonna get involved. It's all of us if we're gonna maintain order and peace in our communities.
Thank you, sir. And I want to go now to a young man who was a Dayton police officer. And he reminded me of me when I was on the department, because I got suspended for a day. And when my suspension went to the Civil Service Board on appeal, one of the commissioners said, well, Frazier's not guilty of anything, but we can't have him getting away with stuff like straightening a sergeant out. because the younger officers after him will try to do the same thing. David Shear was fired from the Dayton Police Department. He was a lieutenant, the only black. And when he dared to bring some truth to a case where a man's back was bent out of shape, he was fired and he appealed. They had to hire him back many months later and buy him lots of new stuff and things. So now here comes a new officer here who was trying to do it right. But in the process of trying to do it right, he himself got fired and is now appealing his case, got a civil service, Ohio State Civil Service ruling, but Dayton is still torn around with the situation. Also, Wortham, would you please speak to this audience?
Yes, Chief, and thank you for having me here. I'm just amazed by all the insight. First off, to introduce myself, I'll be brief. I grew up in West Dayton's minority community. My dad was a police officer. I idolized my dad. He was a homicide detective. And growing up, saw the inadequacies of treatment that minorities and whites were receiving from the Dayton Police Department. So then I decided to get in and make a difference. I started my young career, had two great sergeants protecting me. They knew I had a big battle going against the institution, and they knew how I felt in terms of racial justice. For 7 years, my career prospered. At that time, I decided to stand up again against the code of blue, that people call it, and make outside agency complaints, racial complaints. I had no discipline on my record. It was totally clean, several commendations. And that's after I made the racial complaint, that's when the avalanche of frivolous investigations came. Then my employment was forcibly separated. I really want to give a shout out to Sheriff Brunson. I'm so proud of him, and I admire how he speaks his truth about hiring people who care about the community. And Pastor KJ Jones said it correctly, there's no accountability. And I think we all have the same opinion of theory that it's a systemic issue, and it spreads to, it cascades to what we see on YouTube with officers' knees on his neck. And we know it's deeper than that. And I'm a real technical person, so I try to make it brief. The two things that I came to realize that are bad practices and patterns of local police departments. And why I think local police departments are unique is because we're the face of government. When people are unhappy with government, they're seeing a law enforcement officer. They're not seeing an FBI agent. They're not seeing the state attorney generals. They're seeing me. I'm suited up, and I'm booted up, and here we go. So first off, I would say the misuse and unequitable allocation of resources, police resources, is a number one core issue. When you look at where the money goes, that tells me as a police chief how you feel. When you say I want minorities, but you're spending less than 1% of your department resources on minority recruitment, I don't believe you think it's that much of a priority. When you're spending double digits of militarized equipment, robots, tanks, SWAT equipment, grenade launchers and things of that, that's 10, 12% of your budget. That tells me how you feel. In my experience as a Dayton police officer, minorities and lower social-economical people get the short end of the stick. When you look at the officer per ratio of citizens, it's substantially different from Caucasian areas where there's higher income businesses, higher income neighborhoods. So the calls for service for Blacks in Dayton is going to be substantially lower. Officer misconduct complaints won't be investigated nearly as much because there's too many of them. Neighborhood complaints of neighborhood issues can't be addressed adequately. And then second, I'm gonna try to make it real quick. I know I'm saying a lot of information, but the police, we're seeing across the country, the police are governing themselves. There's too much power. And I think that young people, even older people, we're talking about this imbalance of power. The citizens, the people who the Constitution was written to regulate the government, but instead we're seeing an over-oppressive and tyrannic government to where they have all control. Police chiefs who are making $300,000-$400,000 a year, who are doing nothing but backing the commission or city officials or council members to protect their jobs or their colleagues' jobs. We're seeing that's not in the best interest of the American people. And I think that we need to shift this imbalance of power by creating true civilian authority boards. You know, there's a lot of police chiefs that say they have citizen councils and civilian authority boards, but they don't have any authority and voting powers or any say in terms of who's disqualified to be a police officer, if the officer's use of force is justified. It all comes down to law enforcement. They choose how they run, and we're seeing that they're creating these rules as they're playing this game. And so regardless of what I'm saying, this paradigm is going to change. And the American people, we're resilient, and the American people, we're not stupid. And we're definitely going to move forward on this. And I think that this is all for the better. I think that my experience and us coming together, talking about these issues, are great for all American people. And I appreciate it.
Okay, young man, and I'm proud of you and your stand. Let's go to Attorney Military. What do you sense of everything you've heard, Miss Attorney?
Well, first I want to thank you all for having me here, and I certainly appreciate it. And to be amongst such a group is such an honor, and I'm humble. I do want to say, listening to everything, especially what you started off with, Chief Frazier, when we're talking, yes, the police are people, and all of them are not bad. The problem we have is that, I think one of your first questions, do we need reform? Why police reform, criminal justice reform? We need a overhaul of the entire system. We need reform, police reform, prison reform, legal reform, criminal justice. The criminal justice system has to be overhauled, period. And let me go back to, I started out as a young prosecutor 30 years ago. One of the things, and so let's talk about the things I saw that police did, and I think the young man, Mr. Jordan Worthy, mentioned it. The things I saw the police do, and it involved, as you said, the code of blue. That was 30 years ago. There was kind of a code of silence amongst the police. When others did wrong, no one wanted to come forth because they would be ostracized. So those officers, although good officers, they remained silent. Fast forward 30 years, we are still suffering from some of the same evils. And let me tell you, as a young prosecutor, I walked into that office believing what I learned in law school, and that is the criminal justice system and the laws, the Constitution was geared up so that it would allow, and this is what we were told based on the constitutional search and seizure, that it would allow 10 guilty people go free before it allowed one innocent person to be prosecuted. And that's what I believed. And when I went to the district attorney's office, I believed that we were there to seek the truth. And that's what prosecution is. And I heard Reverend King mention that there's a lot going on in the system, and there is. When you think that you're there for a search for the truth versus seeking prosecution, it really isn't that way in most prosecutors' office, because most of the prosecutors who start out are young prosecutors, and they believe that that case, when the police make that arrest, that is a good arrest. They don't question it. And as the young man said, a lot of the prosecutors tend to back up what the officers say rather than look into the case. I was a little different. I looked at both sides. And I looked at what the defense attorney, when the defense said they had a defense, I investigated. We don't use, or there wasn't much money used to investigate what the defendant said really happened. It just didn't happen because all of the prosecution, the money went into investigating whatever the police said happened. And with that, I will tell you, I continued to prosecute based on that. And I believe what happened in my life was God telling me that's not what happened. My older brother, 300, maybe 400 miles away from Philadelphia. I started out my prosecution in Philadelphia. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, moved to Georgia about 27 years ago. But I started out in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, which is one of the largest district attorney's offices in the country. And in that office, my office my brother, again, had been arrested for minor infractions. He was an alcoholic, so it's mostly involving just drinking, driving. But back then, imagine 20-something, well, almost 30 years ago now, they didn't have the computer system where you could bring up images. Then it was just the books, where you flipped through the books and saw pictures. Long story short, my brother was, as I said, hundreds of miles away when a crime happened in Philadelphia. Thank God he was. There was another young man involved in this arrest. Long story short, something happened, a crime happened. A witness saw something through the rearview mirror, so didn't have a fake. This is when I realized mistaken ID is real, and there are a lot of individuals in jail. These individuals saw this, looked at the book, flipped through it, found about 4 or 5 people who they said committed this crime. My brother was supposed to be the person with the person who did a shooting. Of course, neither of these individuals that were picked out in this book did anything. The other young man had an alibi, and again, of course, my brother was hundreds of miles away. This is when I learned that you can still, based on all of that, motion to suppress, he was still arrested, went to trial. He had his case severed. I worked in that DA's office, and I couldn't understand that they sought a prosecution. They did not seek the truth. But because my brother was hundreds of miles away in an all-white church at the time this happened, and the reason he was away because my mother sent him to live with my older brother, who was a police officer in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. So he's hundreds of miles away, living with his older police officer brother to keep him straight. Well, that's what kept him out of jail. Came back, had to make a huge bond. The other young man who was also charged could not make a bond. Long story short, case severed. We had we fought a good defense, and I was also here I am, assistant DA, and chose to testify in this case. After 2 minutes, long story short, I saw what happened. My brother obviously was vindicated because all of these white people came to testify that that's where he was. The other young man who did not commit the crime, poor, did not have the means to defend himself, was convicted, served 16 to 32 years. Could not believe it, left the DA's office about 6 months later, moved to Georgia, said I would never prosecute. Found myself in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office when I decided to make a change. And that's when I agreed we needed things like reform of the criminal justice system. I'm a fast forward. I ran for office, became the first African-American Solicitor General, Chief Prosecutor in Clayton County, Georgia, which encompasses the airport. And the first order of business was to create a criminal justice reform program, which was a pre-trial diversion, an intervention. That intervention was to investigate the first offense of any person who came in that system and to put them in that program, whether guilty or not guilty, and give them a second chance. That program I created did not exist. I had people come against me, death threats, and this was in 2004. I took office in 2005. So you can't tell me in this decade that these are the things that are still happening. I had meetings after I became the chief prosecutor of state court with all of the police chiefs. We talked about what changes needed to be made. There were a number of changes, but guess what? We could not change the mentality of some of those bad officers. And so I'm going to stop there, but that's just one indication why we need reform. So I know my time's up, but hope I can talk about it more later.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so very much. Now let's go to a man who wears another 2 hats. Not only is he a judge, but he's also a minister. And this whole thing today is about what role should the ministry be playing, or clergy that is, in trying to make this society a safer and better place, and what needs to be done to reform the criminal justice system. Judge Wimbush, what say ye?
Good morning. Good afternoon, Chief. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say and how I want to say it. I think one of the issues that we have we have to understand that there's been a transformation in our local communities. And there's a disconnect between the communities and between law enforcement. Now, traditionally, ministers have played, and even today still play, a powerful role in influencing what goes in the criminal justice system. As a judge, one of the things we try to look at is the character of the defendant. And oftentimes the character can be described by somebody who knows that person, and ministers over the past have always been some of the best proponents of some of the best examples of coming into a courtroom and telling the judge, I know this young man, I know this young woman, this is a mistake that they made. I know their families. But that connection is not necessarily there anymore. And I think that's one of the issues that we have to talk about. We got, and a lot of it is related to the absence of people that look like us that are policing our communities. If you are placed in a community that looks like you, that you have a connection to, then you are more apt to listen to an individual. I was watching the video just this morning where 3 young men were accosted in California because a restaurant owner called the police about 3 men who were supposedly trying to rob the store, some sort of disturbance. And they accosted 3 teenagers at a bus stop. And these were all white police officers, and they drew weapons on them. Now, if you've got the restaurant manager coming out telling the police that's not them, these are not the people that we called you about. Those are 3 teenage kids. They haven't done anything. But they just wouldn't listen, and they ended up putting all 3 of these kids in a police car, even though the person that called them told them that they weren't the perpetrators. And that's why I said there's a disconnect in the communities, because these people a lot of these police officers who are policing our communities, they don't come from our communities. So they don't have a connection. And so it's hard for ministers to develop that relationship with police officers who don't live in the community. Even here, like in Griffin, half of our department does not live in Spalding County. They live outside of Spalding County. So they don't necessarily, I've had at least 3 minister friends who've been routinely pulled over, going back and forth to their church. And in the past, that just wouldn't happen because the police wouldn't know what ministers are operating in that community. They wouldn't dare pull that minister over because they see that person every day. They see them in the community. But now you got young officers who are coming in who have no respect for that community. And the ministers can try to tell them who they are. They don't want to hear that. They don't care. All they know is in their eyes, you could be a perpetrator, and they don't take the time to learn the community. So I think one of the things that this group can do is create more opportunities for the clergy to get involved, to develop relationships with the police department. I know my pastor has tried that many times, even in getting backlash from people who say, well, he's a snitch. Well, he got involved because literally his church got shot up. Gang members got into a fight and they shot into the church. And he was able to broker a meeting with the gang members because one of the gang members' grandmother was actually working in the church.
Okay, is that it, sir?
That's it.
Okay, thank you so very much. I see Reverend Marcia Dinkins has joined us. So I don't know how much of what you have heard Reverend Marcia. So let me just ask you to just introduce yourself and tell us why you weren't being on such a meeting with people like us, and what you think about the criminal justice system. Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh,
I wasn't ready. I thought I was coming in as a listener.
no, ma'am, you're
So
not going to
Reverend
sneak
Marcia
up in
Dinkins.
here. I want to hear from that brilliance that you have in your head. You do a lot of things for a lot of reasons, and you're heavily involved in trying to raise the consciousness of women from where it used to be and how women used to be treated. So just how do you think this system relates to women these days?
Well, I think the women are muted in the system. First of all, if we talk about, and it depends on what level we're talking about, but we know that women are muted in the system through the policies, through the polity, if we're talking from a place of faith, and even if we're talking from a place of the criminal justice system. Women have a set of unique needs that the criminal justice system does not really pay attention to. When you think about having to pass laws so that they don't have to pay for their sanitary means, that, we see a system that is failing women. And for me, it's not just about the criminal justice system, it's also about the child welfare system. There's a parallel here, which we tend to overlook and not even talk about, because of the fact that the child, when you incarcerate the mother, you incarcerate the whole family. But then we have the Adoption Safe Families Act, which was enacted as another measure for the government to try and clean up their first faulty error in removing children from the home, which says that after 12 to 15 months, if a child has not been permanently placed, then, after 12 to 15 months, they have to start working on permanent placement for the child, which in turn is another way that the criminal justice system is failing the parent and failing the child, because if mom has 2 years, then she's at risk of having her parental rights terminated. I think I can say this, I kind of sit on both sides of the fence sometimes. Having a master's degree in criminal justice and public policy, I see where police officers at times can get a bad rap. And when depending on who the messengers are and who's telling the story, then they get, there's this categorical type of story that goes around that glumps all of the police officers together, when you definitely have some who are really out here trying, and they don't understand that because they're under orders and there are things that they just have to do in response to their job, not so much as a lack of response to the community, that I think we need to raise. And also understanding that police officers suffer from a level of trauma, but we have to be able to separate those who kind of suffer from trauma from those who are just really downright racist police officers and don't care about the Black body. And so, for me, it's about a system within a system that we have to figure out how to break down the culture of that system. I don't think police officers need a whole lot of training before you break down the culture of the system. And it's the culture of policing that's the problem. It is not just all policing, but the culture of policing, because you can have a Black police chief, but the underpinnings of his leadership is white. So who's really running the show? And if the mayor is white, the police, the prosecutor is white, the coroner is white, then he really doesn't have any say. So it's things that we have to also educate ourselves on with regards to the criminal justice system, to not only reform it, but to also break down the culture of policing and rebuild it in a way that's more healthy than harmful for people out here, especially Black bodies, Black women, Black men.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so very much. Miss Elise, you are the youngest person on the block, but you're here today because I have such tremendous love, trust, and respect for your character and your ability as a young woman to take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and to make things happen. And I hope you've been here all along. I didn't know you was here, but if you have been here, give us a young interpretation of what you have heard here today from your seniors?
Well, I'm really thankful for the opportunity to listen and to learn from all of you all. Just throughout the duration of this call, I've learned so much from so many perspectives and lived experiences from you all, and appreciate it. I was asked to give, I guess, a youth perspective. I think of that in different ways because they're those younger than me. But I'll give what I guess is a millennial perspective. I also live in Tuskegee. Well, I'm from Tuskegee, Alabama, and will tie in some of my local perspectives here as well. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, excuse me. The real you, my 9-month-old nephew was in the background. Excuse me. But yeah, so the first thing I think about panning out from criminal justice and taking a broader world view is just considering what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of world do we want to live in? That was my fundamental question when thinking about my remarks. And when I think about the tenets of what kind of worlds millennials say they want to live in, the broad themes are that they want to live in a world where everyone has access to the same resources and opportunities, that there is live in a world where there is empathy for and connection with each other, and a world where we live in partnership with the planet, especially as we are a generation of people who are coming into a warming planet in which our climate is changing. Millennials are purpose-driven, deeply skeptical and pragmatic, and expect transparency. And the need for transparency and accountability has been a consistent theme throughout this entire conversation. I think it's just on the forefront of our public discourse here in America and really around the world. You know, each and every system has to hold its own people and its own practices accountable. If a doctor does malpractice, there are certain systems that are supposed to be in place for accountability. If a person flips the hamburgers wrong at McDonald's wrong too many times, they're probably not going to still work at McDonald's. And I think one thing that has been that has pushed people to the edge with the criminal justice system is that not just policing, but as Mr. Frazier showed, that the criminal justice system has a number of facets to it, that the hamburgers have been flipped wrong too many times. And the result of the hamburgers being flipped wrong too many times is that it has really negatively not impacted just individual lives, but impacted an entire generation and entire society of people. And obviously done so disproportionately to impact and influence what the Black and brown communities look like, particularly for Black communities. So some things that I think are important, my background is in public health, and particularly in environmental health. And I say the environment, not just as our natural environment, but our cities, our physical places where we live, work, and play, is I think that one, we need to eliminate the criminalization of public health issues. I said I live in Tuskegee, Alabama, and I look at the news report, the criminal activity that happens here. Tuskegee, for those of you all who don't know, I think maybe most of you do, is a small African-American majority African-American town, lower income town. And as I look at many of the criminal activities we have here, they're often a function of poverty, or a function of underlying public health issues. Like mental health is a public health issue. Domestic violence is often results of a public health issue. Break-ins are often a result of poverty. And so I think that it's important that we eliminate the criminalization of public health issues and eliminate the criminalization of poverty by starting to take on public health issues head on and take on poverty head on. I think it's important that we have alternatives to incarceration. I'm the founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Next Step Up. We provide mentoring and tutoring to high school students. And I've mentored and tutored a number of high school students who really thought they had no hope because who thought they had no hope or who, you know, seemed like they didn't understand how to, you know, pursue their own life goals. And there are a number of students who I have tutored who are now prospering as a result of just having someone to help them along the way. So I think as we consider alternatives to incarceration by digging into the root of some of these criminal issues, that we can move the needle forward. And I have a few more, but I'll skip through some of those. A few more are ensure decent detention centers and decent detention conditions. Remembering 1 minute left. Okay. And, you know, really just going back to this accountability, I think a lot of the issues in criminal justice issues are really human rights issues. And so we really have to continue to put a focus on human rights within the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Just a minute before you go, teach us old folks something. Who motivated you and inspired you to be as intelligent and as committed to dealing with society as you are? Where did you get that inspiration from?
I first say my parents, and there's a strong role for parents and for expectations that parents set. The literature for student and youth motivation all shows that parental expectation and expectation from mentors plays a big role. So I first say my parents, and then I just say the insights that I've gleaned from my observations of society and the world have pushed me to work on the issues that I give my energy and my time to.
So where do you get the guts and the grit to just step on out front and take care of the business?
Guts and the grit. I think a lot of it comes from support. I have a very supportive family, very supportive friends. I also have a God who I know has my back at all times, no matter what. Praying and faith. I literally just follow what God tells me to do. And thankfully, He supported me and carried me along the way. Somehow my life has been a story of stepping into fights, but I also come from people who step into fights. And I don't say people like my family. I mean, people like you. I come from you, many of you, especially from Tuskegee. So I guess that's where I get the guts and the grits to do it.
How much have you heard today of this meeting?
Oh, I was on most of the call. I got in about 10 minutes after you all started.
Okay, very interesting then. What's your theory then on what needs to be done to make the society a better place, and how can we reform the criminal justice system and our police in order to make sure that they do their part in making it a more functional society?
I really like the different perspectives of that, what I've heard on the background, the level of expertise, and I like the diversity of all those individuals that spoke, especially those who are attached to clergy as well as law enforcement. I am speaking from a perspective of an individual who has had their own personal interaction with the criminal justice system. And from my perspective, the only way we can change something is by connecting to those who have been impacted by those type of systems. So I often refer to the criminal justice system as the criminal injustice system, because a lot of the laws and things that are written, the policies that are connected to it are really archaic, and they are racially biased. And so many of us are impacted because of the disparities that exist. And so because of people like you all who have taken the time to take your passion and wrap that into what it is that you do, this is the way that change will be enacted. We can't get change if we don't actually really roll our sleeves up and deal with those things that are wrong with the system. So there needs to be a complete overhaul. The overhaul can only take place when we include those who are on the grassroots levels who have been impacted, and we have to go back further than just dealing with now. So a lot of my expertise, I do have a background where I've studied the criminal justice system. I am very concerned about the level of mass incarceration and how it is changing rapidly, and including largely women and African American populations at growing at alarming rates. I'm very, 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 very interested in changing the dynamics of that. But I'm also interested in the policies that continue to put people in those places, both on the criminal justice side as well as the side that has impacted mass incarceration. So, my idea of changing it, you have to match the policies up with the actual system in order to overhaul it. But it's completely broken. It doesn't work at all, or it works the way that they intended it to work against us.
Dr. Latrice, can you turn that phone around and put the window behind the camera so that we can see you?
Can you see me better now?
Yes, ma'am.
I keep trying to get light wherever I can get light, because the lights were on when you all were on the call originally. Everything just popped out about 10 or 15 minutes ago. So everything was on. So now, what about now? Is it better?
Well, you look much more beautiful now than you was in that shadow. All right. So now we will go to a question that's from the chat, Ms. TD.
Yes, we have a question from Jordan Wortham, and it is to Sheriff Brunson. And it says, if an officer appears apathetic or uncaring to the community, what actions can you take that will be attainable when there is an FOP, Fraternal Order of Police conditions, in terms of collaborative agreements or an all-white rank and file department that ties your hands?
That's kind of a tough question because, well, to be honest, you know, we are mainly Black here. I have one white officer, and that's never a problem here. You know, I'm not prejudiced at all, but most of the people here in Tuskegee and Macon County, majority are Black. We do have a majority white town called Notasulga, but the majority of the people here are Black people in Macon County. So we really don't have a Black-white issue with that in law enforcement. But if an officer is not, let me read this, to be apathetic or uncaring to the community, that's a Black officer or a white officer. I call them in and tell them, hey, we all about community policing. And I try to give them a little reform. I might even have them ride with my field training officer some more if I get any complaints on them or anything about, you know, from the community about them not being caring, not being the type of officer that I want them to be. And I have had to call officers in and say, because I've gotten some complaints to say, hey, they didn't seem to be caring, or they didn't talk to me right, or different things like that. And if they do that, I do call the officers in and tell them what the community thinks about them and what's going on. And I let them know, hey, that's not the way we operate. And I hadn't had to do that but once or twice to an officer to let them know that that's not how we do things. Usually when I tell them that, it kind of changes. If it don't, I will have them ride with the field training officer to correct those mistakes. And I hadn't had to fire anybody because of that, but I let them know that I will if they're not treating the community right. I let them know that, hey, we're part of the community and we're here to service the community. And I do let them know that sometimes, you know, being a public servant, sometimes the community is hot with them. Sometimes, you know, we are in the age right now where everything is asked, everything is questioned that we do. And I let them know that personal battles like that shouldn't be fought out in the field. They need to come to my office. You don't stand out there and yell and fuss with the people in the community. If you have a problem, you say yes, no, and come on in. And if we have to call them in and call the officer in, then we'll do that and talk about it. But my officers never to stand out and fuss with anybody in the community and do those type things. And if they do that, I let them know that I don't agree with that. You know, I'm always going to stand. I'm not going to say I'm going to stand with the officers. They right, but if they wrong, they're definitely wrong. And I'm going to tell them that. We don't put up with that type of behavior. And just bringing them in and talking to them usually let them know how I feel about that. You know, I know that we got to win in these situations. If we go out to take somebody to jail, they got to come to jail. But we're going to be polite when we do that. We're not going to stand out and yell and talk to people. You know, we're just not going to do that. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, sir, you did. That was very good. And I'm going to use my little closeout, and then we're going to go around to everybody and give you
Well,
2 minutes.
you have another question in the chat box.
Okay.
Okay. One thing we have to remember is that policies have layers, and until we dismantle some of the policies inside the policy, and we also have to bring in more participatory analysis so that we are moving from the public agenda to the political agenda. What are some ways that we can shift the stakeholder and policy analysis to incorporate directly impacted people rather than letting elitism be the guide which perpetuates white supremacy, wealth, division, etc.? And that comes from Dr. Marcia Dinkins. And it's not directed to anybody in particular, but I think she's putting it on the floor for discussion.
Well, policy, I think I may be able to get to where she is. Policy in any police department is always beautiful on paper. But the reality of it is getting it implemented into the minds and hearts and souls of your whole body of law enforcement people is very difficult, because you have in a police department that radical few. They keep up all the noise. They're like an empty wagon. You know, it keeps a lot of noise when it's going down the road. Where if you have a loaded wagon, it just thump, thump, thump down the road. Well, those rowdy and negligent police officers, they keep up a lot of noise, and they can threaten, intimidate, and neutralize, in a lot of cases, the good police officers. So policy has to be well developed. Policy has to be developed from a sense that you draw in the troublemakers and everybody else and have them help in the implementation of the policy, so that when they violate the policy, you can point at them and say, you violated your policy, and you are impacting all of us, rather than you violated our policy. And once we can get it down pat, it has to be a consistency there, because the chain of command in a police department is kind of like this. And you got so many different layers, the corporals and the sergeants and the lieutenants and the captains and the majors and the colonels. And by the time a citizen complaint or a policy interpretation work up through that system, it can be neutralized at all of these levels. So it takes a good police chief, number one, or a sheriff. It takes a good city council to know how to go and select a police chief. Because if you got a city council that's totally ignorant of law enforcement concepts, they may hire anybody for a police chief just because they talk swift, you know. But if you train your councils to know what law enforcement is, and you can only do that with good chiefs and good sheriffs, and then they start putting all of that knowledge into effect when they select the police chief, and then you get him in. Now, once you get the police chief in, you got to understand, if he's innovative and creative, and if he come in and start making some radical changes, that rowdy few that keep up all that noise, they're going to go to work to try to get that chief out really quick. And they're going to work to deny the sheriff a chance to get a good foothold in order to be able to carry on a good policy that is productive for the whole community. So policy development, policy and interpretation, policy inclusion, and policy enforcement. Police officers have to be disciplined. They have to be disciplined. They have too much power and too much weaponry not to be disciplined. And they have to know that their leader is no nonsense and will not tolerate mess. Go ahead. Did I answer that question?
Well, I thank you for that answer, but what I was really asking about is when we talk about these broad strokes around criminal justice reform, and we're saying that, you know, we have to, there are policies that need to be changed, or there are policies that need to come forth. I think what, you know, people don't understand is inside of that bigger platform of state policy or national policy or even our local policy, that there are policies inside of policies that people have to break down, that trickles down. And so, you know, that one part of the answer, yeah, that's a part of it. And I'm glad that you answered it that way, because we don't look at it. We don't look at that there's polity or policies in the church that stop people from being engaged. We don't look at the fact that there are policies that just come and attach to another policy that, you know, is continuing to over-police poverty or over-police the womb or over-police, you know, our communities or whatever the case may be, in the over-policing. And so, you know, and we get caught up in the public agenda. And we need to figure out, how do we move from the public agenda, which is really the outcry. But we've seen, and it's been demonstrated, that politically we are still not a part of that agenda, because when policy analysis or political analysis or stakeholder analysis are done, it's not with us in mind, it's not with our voice there. So I'd like to know, not just within the police force, but within the community, with policy, with legislators, you know, because if we're gonna go for something where we're going to start cracking down the foundations, we have to remember it's a heck of a foundation that we've got to dig deep into. And how do we shift that to make sure, and it may not be an answer today, it may be a practice, whatever, but how do we begin to shift that so that the voices of directly impacted people are, you know, at the decision-making table, are at the point of being a part of these analysis, when the political or the policy or whoever is doing the analysis, we're there. Because we're the ones impacted, environmentally, however, we're impacted.
Absolutely. Well, when I was in Dayton Police Department, I worked for the best police chief I have ever seen, and he was an old white man, and shocked me to death that he had the kind of insight, but he would bring citizen groups in to help develop policy, you know. So the citizens even had input into that policy. And it was a combination of officers and civilian people who were developing the policy. Therefore, the policies were respected better by everybody, internally and externally. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yes, I'd like to comment, Chief. One of the things I agree, in order to change policies within policies, it takes education of, especially if you want to change it within the political arena, it takes education of those who are in those positions. I believe if we don't, some of the legislators have no clue about the legislation that they are voting on. Some of them, I think the Chief Frazier, you mentioned that some of these individuals who are making these laws are started out with one political agenda, and that's the only thing they're sticking with. They don't understand that the United States, the incarceration of citizens in the United States is more than any other country. If they understood that, they'd understand that mass incarceration disproportionately impacts poor people of color and of course, does not make us safer. They don't understand the misguided reliance on over incarceration. So if we can get them to understand, but that takes education from groups like this. In other words, going to our local legislators, letting them know the impact of the laws on those of color and those who are socially and economically disadvantaged. If we can change that, we can change those political policies. And if we put pressure, like I said, we put these people in office, so we educate not only those who are in office, we educate the mass public to know who to vote.
One of the things I wanted to weigh in on real quick was something that Brother Jordan Wortham brought up that I think is so very, very important, and especially given the power of the police union, the FOP. One of the things that happened recently is a Chicago police officer, a rookie police officer by the name of Julius Givens, 30 years old, made the decision that the FOP did not best represent his interest or the interests of other Black people. And he became one of the first officers, certainly in Chicago history, to quit the FOP. He said he refused to pay his dues to an organization that didn't understand the plight of Black people and didn't step up where Black people were concerned, which included its officers. I know he's taken a lot of backlash. I've reached out to him, spoken with him now twice, and invited him on a call like this. I think he would be a good one to talk to. As a means of surmising, we recognize and realize that so often police catch the brunt of what we talk about when we discuss criminal justice reform, when we discuss a lot of things. But it's because those are the first people that anybody sees. When you talk to our young people, they say we have to respond to policing because those are the ones that we see with the knees on the neck. Those are the ones that we see with a 6-year-old baby laying on hot pavement, handcuffed because there was a report of a stolen motorcycle, and they pull a car over with a lady and her children in it, and that little baby who was 6 years old is crying on that asphalt. And we realize she's going to have to go through trauma for a very long time. If not, imagine what her attitude is going to be as she grows up with that image of policing in her mind. Push Black, who's one of our major social engines, if you will, for doing research, says this real quickly. They said that there are 5 things that people have to stop saying concerning police. Number 1, they said, the truth is, when a police officer talks to you, a police officer is one of the only professions that has a right to lie to you while they're talking to you. They can tell you we're discussing this off the record. They can say to you that somebody snitched on you, so you might as well confess. They can snitch on you and tell you there was a death of a loved one or anything else that they want to say. By lying to them, you can be charged lying to an official. But they have the right to lie to you during the course of an interrogation. Number 2, and there are only 5 of them, they said that we want to stop the misnomer that there's a war on cops, that there is not a war on cops, that roofers, for instance, are 10 times more likely to die on the job than a police officer, as are taxi drivers, according to statistical data that they took the time to collect. Number 3, they said the other misnomer is that police are effective at solving crime, that the truth is only 1/4 of all crimes that are reported to police actually get solved by police. That means the community is going to have to step up. That means all of us are going to have to become a part of solving crimes. Number 4, real quickly, they said explaining your innocence, the police often say to people, will help you, you might as well talk to us. What Push Black suggests is that anytime that you're questioned by police, the best thing you can do is get an attorney. That even in trying to explain your innocence, anything that comes out can be used against you, and you want to remember that. Finally, number 5, Push Black said that more Black cops will curb police brutality has also been disproven, that having more cops, Black cops on a police department has not decreased, according to statistical data, police brutality, because the officers that they've interviewed who happen to be Black officers feel like one of their first missions is to prove that they're worthy to have the job to their white counterpart. And as a result, it has not reduced. So those are 5 things that Push Black has come back with that we have to be very honest about in this scenario. And with that, I want to thank everybody, say God bless you all. We're going to do this again, and we hope that you can join us again. This is the kind of conversation we want to make available to our community overall. I especially want to thank, and it's not because I'm setting anybody aside, Sheriff Brunson, bless your heart. I've heard so much about you, and I appreciate who you are, what you're about, and what you stand for. And I pray for more leaders like you, sir. I'm through, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, and let's see, we got to have a little going out thing. Was going to give you 2 minutes. Can't have about 30 seconds now.
Going out word.
Yes, ma'am.
Encouraged.
Okay. Okay, Sheriff Brunson.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Bishop, Chief Frazier, and everybody that joins this discussion. You know, I'm very encouraged, and I want to know if we're going to continue to do this. It's going to be every week thing or whatever, because I learned a lot. and we need to share ideas so we can get through this.
Have to have
So
the
I want
courage
to say
to bring
that,
this.
I want to say that police reform is real. You know, we need to watch the officers that we hire. We need to put money in education and accountability for being a police officer here or a sheriff in our nation. You know, if you don't have good people doing this job, we're going to always be in trouble. I'd rather have one good officer instead of 3 bad officers. Saves you a whole lot of trouble and saves you a whole lot of heartaches if you train these officers and have them doing the things that you want them to do and treating the people the right way. I definitely believe in community policing and helping the people. And that's what we all need to be about. I know it's hard sometimes. You know, as an officer, you can't take your feelings from home to this job. You got to know when people call you, they need help. And that's what we're here for, to help people. And I mean, I love this conversation. Hopefully we're going to do it every week or sometime, Chief. But I'm definitely here for you, for everybody, and definitely need to learn a lot more from everybody. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Reverend King.
Thank you very much, sir. And to all who's on the call, glad to meet you and hope we had a good conversation. But let's take it back to our communities where we come from, because our people need to hear the same thing we are sharing with one another today, because that's what the problem is. We don't share it back to our communities in all our professions. And we take it back, especially when we come in less than 80 some days for election. We need to take all this conversation back to our communities, because all our communities are hurting. I thank you for the chief that shared his insight, the officer from Dayton, and you, sir, for coordinating this, and the bishop. But let's take it back to our community and let's keep it going so we can share one another and deal with one another and just share one another so we can make a difference in our communities. Got to take it back to our communities.
Reverend Jones.
Thank you, Chief. And I agree with Pastor Bishop that just spoke. We do have to take this word, take this training, take this education back to our communities and remind people of the hope. It's not going to fix itself, but we all have an obligation to do our part to make it better.
Officer Wortham.
I'm sorry. In closing, thank you for having me. Bishop J and Ms. Miller, Reverend Dinkins, they got right to the heart of it. I think Sheriff Brunson's experience, I think, is unique. It's different than mine. Being a Black man, I'm used to an all-white police department. Currently, the Dayton Police Department is 90%. Across the nation, most police departments are all white, male-dominated. But, you know, getting to the core of the issues, when you look at the underlying issues of the tax system, which is bought out by corporations who elect our police chiefs and mayors. You have a country of haves and have-nots. They have power, and then there's the powerless. And it's coming down to a lot of money. You look at our disenfranchised educational system, it's about protecting insider knowledge and keeping a group suppressed and maintaining control and monetizing another group. So those are the core issues. But I would say that all police chiefs, you know, they talk really elaborate, and they talk about community policing and implicit bias training and mutual accountability. And they care. They say that we care. They're well spoken. And all I ask is, put your money where your mouth is. Show me your budget. If you care about hiring Blacks, which the percent of your budget that you're spending on Blacks compared to militarized equipment. And then secondly, the police chiefs that's making $300,000-$400,000, show me you care. Take a 30% pay reduction. Give that to minority recruitment. Give that to hiring more police officers. I think that speaks more loudly than words. Thank you.
Okay. I want to piggyback on what was said already in summary, just that we have some very good ideas and thoughts and perspectives that we can collaborate on, and bringing all of these together and just kind of working hand in hand with one another and talking to stakeholders in the community, we can bring forth a change, and we can start looking at what we need to do to overhaul what is wrong with the criminal justice system. So I just look forward to what ideas everyone brings, and just want to introduce, some thoughts and perspectives that I have, but also I want to bring some voices from other people as well. So I look forward to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
In addition to serving as your technical director today, I also serve as president CEO of the Southern Christian Leadership Foundation, and I serve as the chairman of the Macon County Healthcare Authority for the entire county of Macon here in Alabama. So I am very encouraged with first the caliber of people that are on this call. I feel privileged to be among you, and I look forward to us working together to moving forward. I think that out of this group can either come some recommended white paper or policies to move forward. But I'm very excited about the people here and what this group can do.
Thanks again. We will be producing a white paper as a result of this conversation that we will be sharing with others. We will gather again at the same time 2 weeks from today. I don't know what that date is. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but 2 weeks from today will be the same time. We'll be touching base with our team to see who will be hosting that week, and we will make sure that you have the subject matter. This is a conversation we need to continue. This is what the Congress is about, and we must formulate plans and policies that are going to make a difference. We must train, we must educate, but not the same as police training. There has to be a community component, and I don't know if anybody better to do it than the historic Black church, who needs to step up in a time and in a way like we have never done before. If we didn't mean anything to our communities, politicians still wouldn't come running to us, Brother Jones. If we didn't have a voice, they wouldn't want to speak to us. And so we have to make sure that we use that voice by bringing law enforcement, by bringing people like Attorney Leslie Miller Terry, like Judge Wimbish, and all of you who are on this call. By having your voices, it puts us in a better position to make a difference. So we're going to do closing prayer and we will dismiss. I'm going to ask my friend and my brother, Reverend Joel King. Joel King, who is the cousin of Martin Luther King Jr. We're going to ask Brother King if you will go ahead and say our prayer and dismiss us.
Thank you, Bishop. I think that date is August 24th, will be 2 weeks.
August 24th, 4 o'clock Eastern, and it'll be 3 o'clock Central Time.
Right,
thank you.
Bishop. Father God, we thank you for this gathering on this Zoom of important issues that we fight in our communities, in all our communities. We thank you for this conversation with one another. We hope that we have gained knowledge and influences that we can take back to our community and make our communities better and make each of us better as well. Thank you for being God in our lives all by yourself. We pray that you dismiss us from this Zoom, but not from one another and not from the cause that we all work for to make this world a better place in which we live. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, and God bless you all. We look forward to the 24th. We'll join again, and I've got a feeling after Chief and I get our heads together, we'll have others at the table with us. Thank you so much, and God bless.